Ethan Carter was not a man who stood out in a crowd. He lived in a small town in Ohio, where life moved slowly, and everyone knew each other's names. Ethan worked as a mechanic, fixing cars and occasionally tinkering with old electronics people brought to his shop. His life wasn't exciting, but it was predictable, and that suited him just fine. What made Ethan different from the others in his town was his daughter, Lily. She was 16, full of energy, and always curious about the world beyond their quiet little corner of the planet. To Ethan, she was everything. But one day, Lily disappeared. It happened on a Thursday evening. Ethan came home from work expecting to find her sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her tablet or chatting with friends online. Instead, the house was empty. Her backpack lay on the floor, and her phone was still plugged into the charger. At first, Ethan thought she might have gone to a friend's house, but when he called around, no one had seen her. Hours turned into days, and the police seemed unable to do anything. They told Ethan that teenagers sometimes ran away, that Lily would likely come back on her own. But Ethan didn't believe them. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. Desperate for answers, Ethan started looking for clues wherever he could. One night, while sorting through some old junk in his garage, he stumbled upon a satellite dish he had salvaged years ago. It was broken and covered in dust, but something about it caught his eye. On a whim, he decided to fix it. For hours, he worked under the dim light of a bare bulb, tightening screws and soldering wires until the dish hummed faintly with power. Then, almost by accident, he tuned it to a frequency he didn't recognize. At first, all he heard was static. But then, faintly, a voice broke through. It was distorted, mechanical, and impossible to understand. Ethan leaned closer, adjusting the dials. Suddenly, the transmission cleared just enough for him to catch a single word: Lily. His heart stopped. The voice repeated the name over and over, like a call or a warning. Ethan's hands trembled as he recorded the signal and traced its origin. The coordinates led somewhere far beyond Earth, somewhere in deep space. Ethan couldn't explain how or why, but he knew this message was connected to Lily's disappearance. He tried to tell the police, but they dismissed him, saying it was probably a prank or a random broadcast from some amateur radio enthusiast. Frustrated and running out of options, Ethan made a decision that would change his life forever. If no one else was going to help him find his daughter, he would do it himself. Late one night, Ethan drove to a private spaceport on the outskirts of town. He had heard rumors about experimental ships being tested there, owned by a reclusive inventor named Marcus Hale. Sneaking past security cameras and slipping through a gap in the fence, Ethan found what he was looking for: a sleek, silver spacecraft called the Starling. It looked fast, advanced, and completely out of his league. But Ethan didn't care. All that mattered was finding Lily. He climbed aboard, his hands shaking as he pressed buttons and flipped switches. Miraculously, the ship roared to life. A holographic display lit up, showing complex navigation systems and controls Ethan didn't understand. Still, he managed to input the coordinates from the transmission and engage the engines. As the Starling lifted off the ground and shot into the sky, Ethan felt a mix of terror and hope. He had no idea what awaited him in the vastness of space, or if he'd even survive the journey, but he was willing to risk everything for his daughter. For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter left Earth behind. Little did he know, his search for Lily would lead him farther than he ever imagined, and set him on a path that would alter the fate of entire star systems. The Starling hurtled through space faster than Ethan could have imagined. The ship's controls were overwhelming, covered in blinking lights and strange symbols that made no sense to him. He gripped the edges of the pilot's seat tightly, trying to steady his breathing as the stars outside the window streaked into long lines of light. It was terrifying, but also strangely beautiful. Ethan had never left Earth before, let alone ventured into deep space. Every instinct told him to turn back, but he couldn't. Not without Lily. For hours, Ethan flew blindly, following the coordinates from the mysterious transmission. The ship seemed to know what it was doing, making minor adjustments on its own as if it were alive. Ethan didn't question it. He just held on and hoped for the best. Eventually, the ship slowed down, and the view outside changed. Instead of endless stars, there was a massive gas giant with swirling colors of orange and red. Orbiting the planet was a small rocky moon, covered in jagged craters and dark shadows. As Ethan approached the moon, alarms began blaring inside the cockpit. A warning flashed on the screen. Hostile vessels detected. Before he could react, 3 ships appeared on the radar, closing in fast. They were shaped like insect wings, sleek and menacing, and they fired warning shots near the Starling. Ethan panicked, grabbing at the controls. He accidentally pressed a button labeled Defensive Mode, and suddenly the ship responded. Bright beams of energy shot out from the Starling, striking one of the enemy ships and sending it spinning away. The other 2 ships hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance from someone flying such an unfamiliar craft. Ethan took advantage of their confusion, maneuvering the Starling closer to the moon's surface. The alien ships followed, weaving between the craters and firing repeatedly. Ethan's heart raced as he dodged their attacks, his hands gripping the controls so tightly his knuckles turned white. Just when it seemed like he wouldn't make it, the Starling unleashed another burst of energy, disabling one of the ships entirely. The remaining ship retreated, disappearing into the void. Ethan landed the Starling in a shallow crater, shaking from adrenaline. He wasn't sure how he'd managed to survive the encounter, but he knew he couldn't stay still for long. Grabbing a flashlight from the ship's storage compartment, he stepped outside. The air was thin, forcing him to rely on the oxygen mask he'd hastily grabbed before leaving Earth. The ground beneath his boots was rough and cold, littered with debris and strange metal fragments. As Ethan explored the area, he noticed movement in the distance. At first, he thought it might be more enemies, but then he saw figures emerging from the shadows. Aliens. They were tall and slender, with pale gray skin and large, luminous eyes. Their movements were cautious, almost hesitant. One of them stepped forward, holding up a hand in what Ethan guessed was meant to be a peaceful gesture. Despite his fear, Ethan stayed put, waiting to see what they wanted. The leader of the group spoke in a series of clicks and hums, which somehow translated into broken English through a device strapped to its wrist. "You fight well," it said, pointing toward the damaged alien ships scattered across the horizon. "Why are you here?" Ethan swallowed hard, unsure of how much to reveal. "I'm looking for my daughter," he said finally. "Her name is Lily. Have you seen her?" The alien tilted its head, studying him carefully. After a moment, it exchanged a few quick sounds with its companions before turning back to Ethan. "We know of Lily. She was taken by the Zenari." "The who?" Ethan asked, confused. "The Zenari," the alien repeated. "They rule this region of space. Ruthless. Dangerous. They take what they want." Ethan's stomach sank. If these Zenari had taken Lily, finding her wouldn't be easy. But he couldn't give up now. "Where can I find them?" he asked. The alien hesitated, glancing at its companions. Finally, it nodded. "We will help you," it said. "But you must understand. The Zenari are powerful. You cannot face them alone." Ethan nodded grimly. He didn't know anything about these aliens or their motives, but he didn't have a choice. If they could lead him to Lily, he would follow them anywhere, even if it meant diving deeper into danger. For now, all he could do was trust that his instincts were right and hope that luck stayed on his side. As the aliens led him back to their makeshift camp, Ethan realized that this journey was only beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. For Lily, the alien who had spoken to Ethan, introduced herself as Kayla. She was younger than the others, with a sharp gaze that seemed to see right through him. Her people, the Vraxi, lived in hiding on the moon, scavenging what they could from abandoned ships and wreckage. They were survivors, constantly on the run from the Zenari, who had conquered their homeworld long ago. Keela explained that the Zenari ruled over 3 star systems with an iron grip, enslaving entire species and seizing resources to fuel their empire. They were ruthless, efficient, and feared by everyone. Ethan listened carefully, his mind racing. The more he learned about the Zenari, the more daunting the task ahead seemed. But he couldn't let fear stop him. Not when Lily was out there somewhere. "Why are you helping me?" he asked finally, looking at Kayla. "You don't even know me." Kayla hesitated before answering. "Because we want freedom," she said simply. "For years we've been too scared to fight back. But seeing you, a single human, stand up to those ships gives us hope. Maybe together, we can do something." Her words struck a chord with Ethan. Though he didn't feel like a hero, he was just a dad trying to find his daughter. "Still," he nodded, "if you help me get to Lily, I'll do whatever I can to help you," he promised. It was all he could offer, but it seemed to be enough for Kayla. Over the next few hours, the Vraxi worked tirelessly to repair the Starling. The ship had taken some damage during the earlier battle, and Ethan didn't have the skills to fix it himself. As they worked, Kayla shared more about the Zenari and their stronghold, the Nexus Spire. It was a massive structure built around a dying star, serving as both the capital of their empire and the center of their power. If anyone knew where Lily was being held, it would be there. When the repairs were complete, Kayla offered to join Ethan on his journey. At first, he protested, insisting it was too dangerous. But she refused to back down. "I've spent my whole life running," she said firmly. "This is my chance to fight back. Besides, you'll need someone who knows how the Zenari think." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. Together, they plotted a course toward the nearest Zenari-controlled system. As the Starling lifted off the moon's surface, Ethan felt a mix of dread and determination. He glanced at Kayla, who stood beside him in the cockpit, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "What happens if we fail?" he asked quietly. "We don't," Kayla replied without hesitation. Her confidence was contagious, and Ethan found himself believing her. For now, the journey to the first Zenari outpost took several days. During that time, Ethan and Kayla talked about everything: Earth, the Vraxi, and their hopes for the future. Ethan told her stories about Lily, how smart and brave she was, how much she loved solving puzzles and exploring new ideas. Kayla smiled faintly, saying, "She sounds like someone worth fighting for." When they arrived at the outpost, it was a grim sight. The station floated in orbit around a barren planet, its surface bristling with weapons and docking bays. Kayla guided Ethan through patrols of Zenari ships, using the Starling's stealth systems to avoid detection. Once inside the station, they disguised themselves using cloaking devices the Vraxi had salvaged. Ethan felt exposed, certain that someone would notice the nervous human wandering among the towering, armored Zenari soldiers. But no one did. They searched the station for any sign of Lily, hacking into terminals and interrogating low-level workers. Finally, they found a lead: a transport ship scheduled to leave for the Nexus Spire within the hour. According to the logs, it carried prisoners, including humans. Ethan's heart raced. This was it. If Lily was on that ship, he couldn't let it leave without her. With Kayla's help, he devised a plan to intercept it. Using the Starling, they disabled the transport's engines just as it prepared for departure. Boarding the ship, they moved quickly, searching each cell until they found a group of frightened humans huddled together. Ethan scanned their faces desperately, but Lily wasn't among them. One of the prisoners, a woman named Clara, recognized Ethan's description of Lily. "She was here," Clara whispered. "They took her to the spire, said she was special." Special. The word sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Whatever the Zenari wanted with Lily, it wasn't good. As they returned to the Starling, Ethan clenched his fists. The Nexus Spire was their next destination, and this time, failure wasn't an option. The journey to the Nexus Spire was long and tense. Ethan sat in the pilot's seat of the Starling, staring at the swirling colors of the dying star around which the massive structure orbited. The spire itself loomed ahead, a towering monolith of metal and glass that seemed to pierce the very fabric of space. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a symbol of the Zenari's power and cruelty. Kayla stood beside him, her expression grim as she studied the defenses surrounding the spire. "This isn't going to be easy," she said quietly. "They'll have patrols everywhere, and their sensors are sharp. We can't just fly in like before." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. He knew the risks, but he also knew there was no turning back. If Lily was inside the spire, he had to get to her, no matter what it took. "What's the plan?" he asked. Kayla pulled up a holographic map of the area. "We need a distraction," she explained. "Something big enough to draw their attention away from the docking bays. Then we slip in unnoticed." Ethan frowned. "And how do we create a distraction?" Kayla smirked faintly. "Leave that part to me." The next few hours were spent preparing. Kayla programmed one of the Vraxi's old drones to act as a decoy, outfitting it with explosives strong enough to disable several Zenari ships. Meanwhile, Ethan reviewed the Starling systems, making sure everything was ready for a quick escape. His hands trembled slightly as he worked, but he forced himself to focus. This wasn't just about finding Lily anymore. It was about survival. When they were ready, Kayla launched the drone toward a cluster of Zenari cruisers guarding the outer perimeter of the spire. As soon as the drone exploded, chaos erupted. Alarms blared, and the Zenari scrambled to respond, leaving gaps in their defenses. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan guided the Starling through the confusion, slipping past patrol ships and entering one of the spire's less guarded docking bays. Once inside, they moved cautiously. The corridors of the spire were cold and sterile, lined with glowing panels that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Kayla led the way, her movements silent and deliberate. They avoided groups of Zenari soldiers, sticking to maintenance tunnels and service elevators. Every step felt like walking into a trap, but Ethan pushed forward, driven by the thought of seeing Lily again. Finally, they'd reached a restricted area marked by heavy security doors. Kayla hacked into the control panel, disabling the locks. Inside, they found rows of containment cells filled with prisoners, humans, aliens, and other beings, all hooked up to strange machines. Ethan's stomach churned as he realized what was happening here. The Zenari weren't just imprisoning these people, they were experimenting on them. "Lily." Ethan called out softly, scanning the cells. His voice echoed slightly, and he froze, worried someone might hear. But then he saw her. She was pale and thin, her hair matted, but it was unmistakably Lily. She looked up weakly, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Dad?" she whispered hoarsely. Ethan rushed to her cell, his hands shaking as he worked to open the door. When it finally slid open, Lily stumbled into his arms, hugging him tightly. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he held her close. "I'm here," he murmured. "I got you." But there was no time for reunions. Kayla urged them to move quickly, reminding Ethan that they were still deep inside enemy territory. As they made their way back toward the docking bay, they encountered a group of Zenari soldiers. A fierce firefight broke out, forcing them to take cover behind crates and debris. Ethan used the Starling's remote controls to summon the ship, which arrived just in time to provide cover fire. As they boarded the Starling, Ethan glanced back at the spire, his heart pounding. They had done the impossible. They had rescued Lily. But this fight was far from over. The Zenari wouldn't let them go without a chase, and Ethan knew that escaping alive would be their next challenge. For now, though, all he cared about was keeping his daughter safe. The Starling shot out of the Nexus Spire's docking bay, engines roaring as Ethan pushed the ship to its limits. Behind them, Zenari fighters swarmed like angry insects, their weapons firing relentless bursts of energy. The cockpit was filled with the sound of alarms and the hum of shields absorbing hits. Ethan gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white, while Kayla worked furiously at the navigation console, plotting a course that zigzagged through debris fields and asteroid clusters to throw off their pursuers. Lily sat in the back, still weak but alive. She clutched the edge of her seat, watching the chaos unfold with wide eyes. "Dad," she said softly, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" Ethan glanced over his shoulder for a brief moment, offering her a strained smile. "We're getting out of here," he replied. "Just hold on." But escaping wouldn't be easy. The Zenari ships were faster and more numerous, closing the gap with every second. One of them fired a missile, which exploded dangerously close to the Starling. The blast rocked the ship, sending sparks flying from the control panel. Ethan cursed under his breath, struggling to keep the vessel steady. "We need help," Kayla shouted over the noise. "These ships are too much for us." Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the Zenari forever, and the Starling wouldn't survive another direct hit. Then, an idea struck him. "Can we send out a distress signal?" he asked. "Maybe someone nearby will answer." Kayla hesitated, then nodded. "It's risky. They might not be friendly, but it's our only shot." She activated the ship's communication system, broadcasting a desperate plea for assistance. For several tense minutes, there was no response. The Zenari ships continued their relentless pursuit, forcing Ethan to perform increasingly dangerous maneuvers to evade their fire. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, a new voice crackled over the comms. "This is Captain Samantha Rivers of the Eclipse Blade. Who's asking for help?" Ethan nearly collapsed with relief. "We're humans, just trying to get away from the Zenari," he replied quickly. "Please, if you can do anything." "I'll see what I can do," Samantha said curtly. Moments later, a sleek fighter craft emerged from behind a nearby asteroid, its weapons blazing. It dove straight into the fray, targeting the Zenari ships with precision strikes. The unexpected intervention gave Ethan and Kayla the chance they needed to break free. "Follow me," Samantha ordered, leading them deeper into the asteroid field. Ethan obeyed, weaving the Starling through narrow gaps between massive rocks. The Zenari hesitated to follow, unwilling to risk damaging their own ships. Eventually, they broke off the chase, retreating back toward the Nexus spire. Once they were clear, Samantha guided them to a hidden outpost nestled within a hollowed-out asteroid. As the Starling docked, Ethan turned to Kayla and Lily. "Whoever she is, we owe her everything," he said. When they stepped out of the ship, they were greeted by a tall, lean woman with short, dark hair and sharp green eyes. This was Samantha Rivers, a rogue pilot who had once served in the Zenari military before deserting. Her face was hardened by years of survival in space, but there was kindness in her gaze as she looked at Lily. "You've got guts, showing up at the spire like that," Samantha said to Ethan. "Not many people would risk going toe-to-toe with the Zenari." "We didn't have a choice," Ethan admitted. "They took my daughter." Samantha nodded, glancing at Lily briefly before turning serious. "You should know, the Zenari don't give up easily. If they think you're a threat, they'll hunt you down. And trust me, they'll consider you one after this little stunt." Ethan swallowed hard. He hadn't thought about what came next, only about saving Lily. Now reality was setting in. "What do we do?" he asked. Samantha crossed her arms. "You could run, hide somewhere remote and hope they forget about you. Or," she paused, studying Ethan carefully, "you could fight back." "Fight back," Ethan repeated, incredulous. "Against the Zenari. We barely survived this time." "You'd have allies," Samantha countered. "There are others, rebels, exiles, even some former Zenari, who want to see the Empire fall. With the right leadership and strategy, you could inspire them to rise up." Ethan shook his head. "I'm just a mechanic from Ohio. I'm not cut out for this." News of Ethan Carter's daring raid on the Nexus Spire spread quickly across the 3 star systems ruled by the Zenari. At first, it was just whispers, rumors of a lone human who had infiltrated the heart of the Empire and escaped with a prisoner. But soon, those whispers grew louder, turning into stories of hope for the oppressed species under Zanera control. The tales painted Ethan not just as a desperate father searching for his daughter, but as a symbol of resistance against tyranny. Ethan didn't feel like a hero. He was still the same mechanic from Ohio, unsure of how to navigate the complexities of interstellar politics or lead a rebellion. Yet, as he traveled with Kayla and Samantha, visiting hidden outposts and meeting groups of rebels, he began to see the impact his actions had made. Wherever they went, people greeted him with admiration and expectation. They wanted him to guide them, to show them that victory against the Zaneri was possible. Kayla worked tirelessly to rally her fellow Vraxi, convincing them that this was their chance to fight back. Many were hesitant at first, afraid of the consequences if they failed. But when Kayla told them about Ethan's bravery and the damage he had already dealt to the Zaneri, some agreed to join the cause. Others followed suit, inspired by the growing momentum. Samantha reached out to her old contacts, former soldiers and pilots who had deserted the Zaneri military after losing faith in their brutal regime. These individuals brought valuable knowledge of the Empire's weaknesses, including details about key installations and supply routes. Together, they formed a loose network of fighters scattered across the 3 star systems, united by one goal: to overthrow the Zaneri. For Ethan, the weight of leadership was overwhelming. He spent hours poring over maps and listening to strategies, trying to understand how to turn scattered acts of defiance into a coordinated effort. Samantha became his closest advisor, teaching him the basics of combat tactics and diplomacy. "You don't need to know everything," she told him, "just enough to keep people believing." Lily stayed close to her father, watching as he transformed from an ordinary man into someone others looked up to. She helped where she could, using her sharp mind to analyze data and suggest ideas. Though she was still recovering from her ordeal, her determination never wavered. "We're doing this together," she reminded Ethan whenever he doubted himself. The first major test of the rebellion came when Ethan received word of a heavily guarded convoy transporting vital resources to the Nexus Spire. If they could intercept it, they would deal a significant blow to the Zanari, while boosting morale among the rebels. Ethan hesitated at first, knowing the risks involved, but Kayla and Samantha assured him it was worth it. "This is how we show them we're serious," Kayla said. "This is how we prove we can win." The operation required careful planning. Rebel ships from different factions gathered in secret, coordinating their movements through encrypted channels. Ethan led the attack aboard the Starling, its advanced technology giving them an edge against the Zaneri's superior numbers. The battle was intense, with explosions lighting up the void of space and debris raining down around them. For a moment, it seemed like they might fail, but then the tide turned. A well-timed strike disabled the lead ship, causing panic among the convoy's escorts. When the dust settled, the rebels emerged victorious. The captured supplies were distributed among the resistance, strengthening their resolve. More importantly, the success of the mission proved that the Zaneri weren't invincible. Across the 3 star systems, whispers of rebellion turned into shouts of defiance. People who had once lived in fear now dared to dream of freedom, all because of one man's refusal to give up. As Ethan looked out at the stars, he realized the journey ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they really could change the galaxy, for Lily and for everyone. The rebels' next target was Arcturus Station, a massive fortress that served as one of the Zaneri's most important supply hubs. Located near the edge of their territory, it acted as a gateway for resources flowing into the Nexus Spire. Taking it down would not only cripple the Empire's logistics, but also send a clear message: the rebellion was growing stronger and bolder. Ethan stood in the center of a makeshift command room aboard Samantha's ship, the Eclipse Blade. Around him, holographic maps floated in the air, showing the layout of the station and its defenses. The plan was risky, too risky, some argued, but Ethan knew they couldn't afford to hesitate. Every day they delayed gave the Zenari more time to regroup and crush the uprising before it gained real momentum. "We'll split into 3 teams," Samantha explained, pointing at the map. "Team 1 will disable the outer defense grid, creating an opening for our ships. Team 2 will breach the main hangar and secure a path inside. And Team 3, you, me, and Kayla, will head straight for the core reactor. If we can sabotage it, the whole station goes dark." Ethan nodded, though his stomach churned with nerves. He wasn't used to leading military operations, let alone ones this dangerous. But he trusted Samantha's expertise, and Kayla's determination gave him strength. "What about Lily?" he asked. "She shouldn't be part of this." Lily crossed her arms, glaring at him. "I'm not staying behind," she insisted. "I've been through worse than this, Dad. I can help." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Kayla interrupted. "She's right," she said gently. "She's smart, and she knows how to stay safe. Besides, we might need her quick thinking out there." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed, though he made her promise to stick close to him during the mission. With the plan set, the rebel fleet prepared to launch. Dozens of ships, each crewed by fighters from different species and factions, gathered in formation. It was a ragtag group compared to the sleek, uniformed armada of the Zenari, but what they lacked in numbers and technology, they made up for in courage and resolve. The battle began with a fierce assault on the outer defenses. Rebel pilots darted through clouds of enemy fire, using speed and agility to outmaneuver the slower Zenari cruisers. Ethan led Team 1 aboard the Starling, its advanced systems giving them an edge as they targeted the station's shield generators. Explosions lit up the darkness of space, shaking the station violently. When the final generator collapsed, cheers erupted over the comms. With the shields down, Team 2 stormed the hangar, engaging Zenari troops in close-quarters combat. Meanwhile, Ethan, Kayla, and Lily fought their way toward the reactor core. The corridors were narrow and dimly lit, forcing them to move cautiously. Zenari soldiers ambushed them repeatedly, but the trio worked together seamlessly, covering each other's backs and pressing forward despite the odds. When they finally reached the reactor room, they found it heavily guarded. Samantha stayed behind to hold off the reinforcements, while Ethan, Kayla, and Lily worked to plant explosives on the core. As they rigged the charges, alarms blared, signaling that their time was running out. "We need to go," Kayla shouted, pulling Ethan away from the controls. But then something went wrong. One of the guards fired a stray shot, hitting a nearby console. Sparks flew, and the door sealing them inside slammed shut. Trapped, they realized they wouldn't make it out before the explosion. Without hesitation, Samantha stepped forward. "Get out of here," she ordered, pulling out a device. "I'll trigger the detonation manually." "No," Ethan protested, reaching for her. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Samantha replied firmly. She gave him a small smile. "You started this fight, Ethan. Finish it." Before anyone could stop her, she activated the device and shoved them toward the emergency exit. The blast threw Ethan, Kayla, and Lily clear of the station just as the reactor exploded, engulfing Arcturus in a blinding flash of light. Silence fell over the comms as the rebels watched the wreckage drift apart. Back aboard the Eclipse Blade, Ethan sat in stunned silence, grief weighing heavily on his shoulders. Samantha's sacrifice had saved them all, but it came at a cost he wasn't sure he could bear. Lily placed a hand on his arm, her eyes filled with tears. "She believed in you," she whispered. "Don't forget that." Kayla nodded solemnly. "She bought us time and hope. We honor her by keeping the fight alive." As the rebel fleet regrouped and moved on, Ethan clenched his fists. The loss hurt, but Samantha's bravery reminded him why they were fighting. For every life taken by the Zenari, there were countless others waiting to be freed. And now, thanks to her, the rebels were closer than ever to making that happen. The fall of Arcturus Station sent shockwaves through the Zenari Empire. For the first time in decades, Cracks began to show in their seemingly unshakable rule. News of the station's destruction spread quickly, igniting hope among the oppressed species and panic within the ranks of the Zenari leadership. The rebels, emboldened by their victory, pressed their advantage, launching smaller strikes against outposts and supply lines across the 3 star systems. Ethan, Kayla, and Lily became the heart of the rebellion, traveling from world to rally support. Ethan still struggled with the weight of leadership, but he found strength in the people who looked to him for guidance. They saw him not just as a father searching for his daughter, but as a symbol of defiance, a reminder that even the smallest spark could ignite a fire. Their next major target was the Nexus Spire itself. It was the seat of the Zenari's power, a fortress guarded by layers of weapons and legions of soldiers. Attacking it directly would be suicide, so the rebels devised a plan to cripple its defenses first. Using intelligence gathered from Samantha's old contacts, they identified key vulnerabilities, relay stations scattered throughout the Empire that coordinated the Spire's defense network. If they destroyed these relays, the Spire would be left exposed and vulnerable. The operation required precision and coordination. Rebel cells worked together, striking the relay stations simultaneously to prevent the Zenari from reinforcing them. Ethan led one team aboard the Starling, targeting a relay near a volatile nebula. The mission was dangerous. The nebula's radiation interfered with sensors, making navigation nearly impossible. But the Starling's advanced technology gave them an edge, allowing Ethan to guide the ship through the chaos. As the last relay exploded, the rebels regrouped near the Nexus Spire. The massive structure loomed ahead, its surface glowing faintly under the light of the dying star it orbited. Without the relay network, its defenses were weakened, but not gone. The Zenari still had enough firepower to repel an attack unless the rebels acted quickly. "We only get one shot at this," Kayla said as she studied the battle plans. "If we fail, the Zenari will crush us." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. He glanced at Lily, who stood quietly beside him. She had grown stronger since her rescue, her confidence bolstered by the role she played in the rebellion. But she was still his daughter, and the thought of putting her in harm's way again tore him. "Stay close to me," he said firmly. "No heroics." Lily rolled her eyes but nodded. "Got it, Dad." The assault of the Nexus Spire began with a barrage of missiles and energy blasts, designed to draw the attention of the Zenari forces. While the main fleet engaged the enemy ships, Ethan and Kayla piloted the Starling toward a hidden maintenance hatch on the Spire's underside. Disguised as Zenari personnel, they slipped inside, moving swiftly through the labyrinthine corridors. Inside the Spire, they encountered heavy resistance. Zenari soldiers patrolled every hallway, and automated turrets fired relentlessly at intruders. Ethan relied on quick reflexes and sheer determination to push forward, while Kayla used her knowledge of alien tech to disable traps and locks. Together, they fought their way deeper into the structure, inching closer to the command center. Finally, they reached the heart of the Spire, a vast chamber filled with glowing consoles and towering screens displaying real-time data from across the Empire. Standing in the center of the room was Commander Drex, the ruthless leader of the Zenari forces. His armor gleamed menacingly, and his cold gaze locked onto Ethan as he entered. "You're persistent, human," Drex sneered, "but persistence won't save you." Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, disabling the Spire's central core. With Kayla covering him, he worked quickly, bypassing security protocols and initiating a shutdown sequence. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered as the system began to collapse. Drex lunged at Ethan, attempting to stop him, but Kayla intercepted, engaging the commander in hand-to-hand combat. The two exchanged blows, their movements fast and brutal. Meanwhile, Ethan completed the final steps, triggering a countdown that would overload the core. "Time to go," he shouted, grabbing Kayla and pulling her toward the exit. As they fled the chamber, explosions rocked the Spire behind them. The once mighty fortress began to crumble, its walls shaking violently. The rebels outside cheered as the Zenari fleet scrambled to retreat, abandoning their posts in disarray. Ethan, Kayla, and Lily barely made it back to the Starling before the spire collapsed entirely, consumed by the dying star it orbited. As they watched the fiery inferno from a safe distance, Ethan felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The fight wasn't over, but the Zenari's grip on the galaxy had been shattered. For now, with the Nexus Spire destroyed, chaos erupted across the 3 star systems. The Zenari Empire, once a monolith of power and control, began to crumble. Without their central command structure, their forces fragmented, leaving entire planets and outposts undefended. For the first time in generations, the oppressed species saw an opportunity to reclaim their freedom, and they seized it. Ethan watched as rebellion spread like wildfire. On one planet, Vraxi workers stormed Zenari labor camps, freeing prisoners and dismantling machinery used to exploit their resources. On another, aquatic beings known as the Caliph rose up from the oceans, using guerrilla tactics to overwhelm coastal fortresses. Even former allies of the Zenari turned against them, unwilling to remain tied to a sinking ship. The galaxy was changing, and Ethan's name became synonymous with hope. But victory came at a cost. The rebels had lost many along the way. Friends, comrades, and leaders who had given everything for the cause. Samantha's sacrifice weighed heavily on Ethan's mind, her final words echoing in his thoughts. "You started this fight. Finish it." He carried her memory with him, vowing to honor her bravery by seeing the rebellion through to the end. Kayla stood beside him, her people finally free after decades of suffering. Though she had dreamed of this moment her whole life, there was no joy in her eyes, only exhaustion. "It's not over yet," she said quietly. "The Zenari won't just disappear. They'll regroup, find new leaders. We have to make sure they can't rise again." Ethan nodded. She was right. Destroying the Nexus Spire had dealt a crippling blow, but the Zenari still existed. Their remnants were scattered, leaderless, but dangerous nonetheless. If the rebellion didn't act quickly, the Empire could rebuild itself under a new banner. Lily noticed the tension in her father's expression and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We did what we set out to do," she reminded him. "The Zenari are broken. That's more than anyone thought possible." "It's enough for now," Ethan admitted. "But Kayla's right. We can't let our guard down." Together, they worked to stabilize the newly liberated regions. Rebel leaders established councils to govern planets previously ruled by the Zenari, ensuring that power remained in the hands of the people rather than falling into tyranny again. Ethan played a key role in these efforts, using his unexpected fame to unite factions that had long been divided. Slowly, trust began to grow where hatred and fear had once festered. Meanwhile, Ethan faced personal challenges. Leading a galactic uprising had changed him, pulling him further away from the simple life he once knew. He missed tinkering with engines in his garage, missed sitting at the kitchen table laughing with Lily. But he also realized how much he had grown. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was someone who had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. One evening, as the Starling drifted silently in orbit around a peaceful planet, Ethan sat alone in the cockpit, staring at the stars. Lily joined him after a while, sitting quietly beside him. "What happens next?" she asked softly. Ethan sighed, leaning back in his seat. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe we go home, or maybe we stay here, help these worlds build something better." "You've already done so much," Lily said. "No one would blame you if you wanted to rest." Ethan smiled faintly. "Rest sounds nice, but I think there's still work to do." As dawn broke over the horizon of the planet below, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't truly over, but for the first time, he allowed himself to believe in a future without oppression, a future where Lily and others like her could live without fear. Whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. Together, they had changed the galaxy. And together, they would keep moving forward. Ethan and Lily eventually returned to Earth, their journey through the stars coming full circle. The Starling touched down in the same quiet town where it all began, its sleek frame looking out of place among the rusted cars and weathered buildings. Ethan stepped out of the ship, breathing in the familiar scent of fresh grass and distant rain. It felt strange to be back after everything they had been through, like stepping into a dream that no longer fit. News of their arrival spread quickly. Reporters and curious neighbors gathered outside Ethan's garage, eager to hear the story of how a mechanic from Ohio had toppled an interstellar empire. At first, Ethan avoided them, unsure of what to say or how to explain the impossible. But Lily encouraged him to share their tale, not just for themselves, but for humanity. People need to know we're not alone out there, she said, and they need to see what one person can do when they don't give up. So Ethan spoke. He told them about the Zenari, the rebellion, and the countless lives lost along the way. He spoke of bravery and sacrifice, of ordinary beings rising up to challenge tyranny. And he reminded everyone that even in the darkest times, hope could light the way forward. His words resonated deeply, inspiring people around the world to look beyond their own borders and imagine a future among the stars. The Starling was retired to a museum, its advanced technology studied by scientists hoping to unlock its secrets. Ethan kept a small piece of the ship, a fragment of its hull, as a reminder of the journey that changed everything. He often ran his fingers over its smooth surface, thinking about the battles fought, the friends made, and the ones left behind. Life slowly returned to normal, though normal now meant something different. Ethan reopened his mechanic shop, fixing cars and tinkering with gadgets as he always had. But his perspective had shifted. He saw the value in every small act of kindness, every moment of peace, knowing how fragile those things could be. Lily enrolled in school again, diving into her studies with renewed passion. She dreamed of becoming an engineer, inspired by the wonders of alien technology she had seen during their adventure. Kayla stayed in touch, sending messages from across the galaxy. Her people were rebuilding their homeworld, creating a society free from fear. She thanked Ethan often, not just for helping her escape the Zenari, but for giving her a reason to believe in a better future. "You did more than save my life," she wrote once. "You showed me what courage looks like." As months passed, Ethan found himself reflecting on the choices he'd made. He had started this journey as a father searching for his daughter, driven by love and desperation. Along the way, he had become something greater, a leader, a symbol, a catalyst for change. Yet, at his core, he remained the same man who cared most about family, friendship, and doing what was right. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan sat on his porch with Lily beside him. They watched the sky darken, dotted with stars that seemed closer now than ever before. "Do you think we'll go back out there someday?" Lily asked, pointing upward. Ethan smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe," he said, "but for now, I'm happy right here." They sat in silence, content in the knowledge that they had done something extraordinary, not just for themselves, but for countless others. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, but Ethan knew one truth. Sometimes, even the smallest actions could ripple outward, changing the course of history. And that was enough.